And tonight we have with us Jean-Claude Kuperminc, who is the director of the Library and Archives of the Alliance Israélite Universelle in Paris. And this is an organization that started more than 150 years ago by some Ashkenazim from the Alsace. The Alliance provided schools and teachers in and around the Mediterranean, and it covered the whole of the Mediterranean world and beyond. And it had lots of impact on Sephardic Jews as well as Ashkenazic Jews. The archives and the library of the Alliance have a multitude of books, manuscripts, photographs, periodicals, and original archives from the schools that were supported throughout the Mediterranean in France and beyond. And it also has photographs, films, audio, you name it. And we are very happy today to have Jean-Claude Kuperminc, who will provide us glimpses into what is there. Thank you, Jean-Claude, and over to you. Stop.
Thank you very much, Tom, and hello to everybody from everywhere, I guess, because I've seen some of the places from Mexico to London. And hello, Lynn. Hello, nice. Some people of acquaintance. That's good to see you. When David and Tom contacted me to make a talk with you people at the Sephardic World, I was really honored, and I was not really surprised, because I think that the Alliance Israélite Universelle has played a major role in the history of Sephardic Jewry since the beginning, the middle of the 19th century. It's a kind of controversial role, you know. I don't know if we will have the time to have this discussion today, but Alliance, the principles of the Alliance, of the schools of the Alliance, was teaching in French mainly, of course. And so that had an impact of the development or the underdevelopment at a certain time of the Judeo-Spanish language there. That's true. But I would like to show in this brief talk, let's say, a brief description of the library and archives and its history, because I think it's an interesting history. And we'll go to try to see what's interesting specifically for Sephardim and Sephardic history, Sephardic general history, literature, and genealogy in our collections. And of course, I'd be happy to try to answer to questions. And even if the questions are not right now, you can always reach me by email or whatever when this session is finished. If you agree, I will leave you from Salonika. I think, I don't know if you can see behind me, there's a view of the Boulevard Hamadi in the modern part of Salonika in the 19th century, which is part of one of our photo collections referring to Turkey and Greece. So I would like now to share my screen. So that's something we always try to do and not always succeed. So now the screen is shared. So I would like you to upload or show your appreciation that you can really see my my slides.
Can you make it full screen? It's not full screen.
it's not full screen. Let's try it. No, let's try it this way. I think there, now this is full screen. Is that okay for you?
No, it's the, just move to the left a bit on the.
You need to go
Oh,
into
sorry,
slide view.
sorry.
Go into
Yeah.
slideshow. There you go.
Yes,
That's
this is
good.
okay.
That's okay now for you?
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. So, Library and Archives of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, which are still in Paris, trying to say why it's a source for Sephardic historical and genealogical studies from the Bibliothèque de l'Alliance and referring to Sephardic World. So I will not lecture you on the history of the Alliance. John said the main things to know. The Alliance developed schools in the Mediterranean area since 1862. A few dates about the building and development of the library itself that may be interesting. So the Alliance was itself founded in 1860, and at the same time the library was created. The first real donation, the first time that the library got some funding, which is something we always need today. The first time the Alliance got some donation and a very large collection of books was in 1867 with Benjamin Mayer Louis Rothschild, not one of the famous Rothschilds, but a man who is important for Jewish libraries in Europe because he funded at the same time the Jewish College Library, for example. So the collection of books and manuscripts, for example, the famous Hebrew manuscripts from the medieval times of Shmuel Davide Luzzatto were created at that time. This collection was bought at that time, and the library developed under the lines of the general science du judaïsme, as we say in French, or an equivalent to Wissenschaft des Judentums in the late 19th century. And many scholars, rabbis, were very active at the head of the Alliance, mainly people like Solomon Munk or Isidore Loeb or Israel Levy, for example. In 1937, the library, the first real library building was created. You can see it on the upper left side, the first reading room you can see here. And this was a very modern thing at the time. And then, sorry. Yes. And then came the Second World War. During the war, there was a whole story which could make another session, I think, another Zoom session for you, but to say it shortly, the library, archives, and all the collections, nearly all the collections, were looted by the Nazis in August 1940. More than 700 crates of books and material were taken away from the library in Paris, and most of them were taken not to be destroyed, as some may imagine, but they were taken to the Bibliothek zur Erforschung der Judenfrage, library for the research on the Jewish question that was built and designed by the Nazis themselves. During all the war, the books stayed there, and at the end of the war, some of the books were taken back and retrieved by the American army, and those were more or less restituted to the library in Paris, and this took nearly 10 years, okay, to get the books back. In the beginning of the post-war period, the library and all the institutions were very poor, of course, but the library reconstructed itself and began to build new collection, and in particular the archives collection. So that's where I say a word of how do we get these archives, which are the main part, I would say, today of our collections. The archives of the Alliance are the administrative papers and the correspondence, the letters received by the headquarters of the Alliance in Paris when they were sent by the agents of the Alliance, the local committee, the schools, all the correspondents of the Alliance from all over the world. So that's millions of pages, literally, that were gathered and preserved until today. And they were organized for the first time as a historical archive collection in the 1960s. You know, the Alliance wanted to write the history of its first centenary, you know, first century. So in 1960, they began to process the archives, and that is the work we are still relying on today. So that was a major thing, and the archives contain letters not only for the administration of the Alliance itself, but they are very important because they collect information about what's happening in the schools, of course, but also what's happening in Jewish life in general at the time, and not only in places where the Alliance was located with a school or big or small school, but also from places where the Alliance has only correspondence, and they all gave very important information and first-hand information on the situation of the Jews everywhere in the world. So those archives are very important. To give you an example, it's not only on Jewish history. We have in those archives from Turkey, papers from the period of the First World War, okay, where the director of the School of the Alliance sees the passing in front, inside his own city, in front of his own school, of the columns of Armenians led by the Turkish soldiers. You know, that's first-hand view of the Armenian genocide in progress, and they wrote this to Paris, and this kind of material is uncensored and absolutely first-hand vision of an event which is not only an event in Jewish history, for example. Then in the history of the library itself, in the end of the 1980s, there was a very large construction, a building in Paris, and this is this library now, which was for nearly 27 years the location of the library, a much larger, much more modern library. And then by the, 3 years ago, in 2017, the library had to move again, and this is the present, sorry. Oops. This is the present state of the library. Much more open stacks now that it was before. A main event also occurred in 2000, when suddenly we, not very suddenly, but when we received archives that had been taken by the Nazis, as you remember, in 1940, everything, but the thing that they were not taken by the American and the English soldiers in 1945, they were taken by the Russians, by the Soviets, and the Russians took what they got to a special secret archives in Moscow. And so those secret archives in Moscow contain material from the Alliance Israélite Universelle as well. So this kind of material we got back only in year 2000. And you can see here, this stamp, the round, the circle stamp here is the stamp from the Nazis, Bibliothek zur Erforschung der Judenfrage, Frankfurt Main. And this on the, on the right is the files, the archives files, designed and arranged by the Russians, and they did a wonderful job in collecting and preserving also the archive. But finally, we've got everything back. Sorry. Yes, okay. So now, of course, we have quite a large digital library, and this is the way you can access a lot of our material. You will, at the end of the session, you will have all the addresses there, but on the digital library and on the general catalog of the library, you can access more than 350,000 records of, as Tom said, books, manuscripts, and some very old manuscripts. We have Kero Geniza fragments, including a handwritten letter by Maimonides. We have a lot of heritage books, first imprint, etc. But we also have a more cultural library, including novels and comic books, and we also have a library for children. So it's very, very complete place. So what do you use to access all this material? I just tell you, and if you want a demo of that, we can do this afterwards, or we can do it privately when you want. The main thing, so I said it, the Bibliothèque numérique, the digital library. The other very important tool is what we call the Rachel network. Rachel network is an union catalog of libraries. So it's a catalog where you can find the data from 5 French Jewish libraries together: the Yiddish library in Paris, the Jewish Museum in Paris, the musical library in Paris, and the religious library of the French Séminaire, together with the Alliance. And so that's a very, very rich content of anything Jewish. We are part of Europeana, the European digital library, of the special program named Judaica Europeana. I think that many of you are familiar with that. So you can access also a large part of the material through Europeana. And we also are part of many, many international cooperation projects, like the Friedberg Geniza projects, like many projects of the National Library of Israel, including Ktiv for Hebrew manuscripts, and including Historical Jewish Press, which has some a few Judeo-Spanish material, but not a lot. I would say that the Alliance, when Tom said a few words about the founders of the Alliance, yeah, you're right. Most of them, and the people who were at the head of the Alliance, most of them were Ashkenazim. I'm afraid I'm Ashkenazi too, so if you allow me. But I would make a little focus on 4 important Sephardic figures that are really, really part of the history of the Alliance. I will stop a few minutes on each of them. Eli Aristide Astruc here, was a rabbi, and he, together with Jules Carvalho, who was an engineer, they were 2 of the 6 real founders of the Alliance. So 2 out of 6, it's quite a good figure, I would say. And they were of Sephardic descent, Portuguese for Astruc and Carvalho as well. Astruc was more a liberal kind of rabbi, which was not really obvious to be in France at the time. It was not like in Germany. And he ended being the chief rabbi of Belgium because he was not that welcome in France. And Jules Carvalho was a very important engineer and also a politician, and he was also very devoted to the Jewish cause. And he finally ended his life in Spain, building a lot of hard works in northern Spain, and he was all of his life really attached to the history of Jewish culture. Maybe you've heard of Joseph Nehema, the third from the left. Joseph Nehema, he is the author of well-known history of the Jews of Saloniki. He is also the author of the well-known dictionary of Ladino, of Judeo-Spanish. And he wrote extensively about the history and life of Judeo-Spanish people. And that is kind of a paradox, because Joseph Nehema was a teacher and director of school of the Alliance. So, as I told before, at the same time that man in the end of the let's say the beginning of the 20th century and middle of 20th century was working for the Alliance, which gave Jewish culture, or the French way, I would say, to all these people, and somehow preventing them to use the Judeo-Spanish language. And at the same time, the man was the real historian of his community and the historian of his language. So that was not impossible to be both. And Nehema published extensively about the history and the content of the Judeo-Spanish language. The fourth figure I would like to mention here is Mr. Eli Namias. He was not a scholar at all. He worked in the oil industry at very high level, but he was a book collector. And among the books he collected, he gathered a very important collections of Judeo-Spanish and Spanish books about Judeo-Spanish culture. And he, at the end of his life, he decided to donate this collection to the Alliance Israélite Universelle. So that's one part of our very important Judeo-Spanish collection, or Judeo-Spanish related collection. And among them, there are a few Sephardic treasures. I would show just a few of them. Okay. First of all, I've taken examples from the Namias collections, but of course there are others in our general collection of the Alliance. But the first one here is one of the rare copies of the Ferrara Bible, 1852, which is the Spanish Bible, known as the basis of the Ladino language. Okay, the basis of Ladino, which is a word, I would say, word-to-word translation from Hebrew to Spanish of the Hebrew Bible. And that was the basis of a lot of the Judeo-Spanish language. So we have this beautiful copy here. On the right, you have another kind of document, which is very beautiful also. It's in Hebrew, it's not in Judeo-Spanish, but it's a Mahzor for the Rosh Hashanah and Kippur mainly, but which was created and designed by the community of Avignon. You know, Avignon and like Avignon and Carpentras in the south of France, southeast of France, where what was known as the Jews of the Pope Jews. Okay, that was a very important document also. And in the middle, you have a page of a very rare document, which is, I wouldn't say it's Judeo-Spanish. It is written in Spanish, but it's a sort of esoteric manuscript, which we know a lot of copies, a lot of versions in many countries and in many languages. It's you know, it's a sort of practical Kabbalah used for magical purpose also, Claviculis Salomone. But this one is, to my knowledge, the only known version of a manuscript in Spanish of this text. So that's also a very, very important document. And it's beautiful. It's written in gold, golden ink. It's very beautiful. So that just a few examples of what Sephardic heritage can be found here. Of course, you will find a lot of text of Hebrew texts from Sephardic rabbis and from also rabbis from North Africa, which are in our collection. But we also have what I would say pop culture, which are more day-to-day publications, which are, I think, also very important to preserve and are now very, very useful for the historians. On the left is the title page, a part of the title page of a periodical, a journal called Hamenorah, and it was the journal of the Bnei Brit, okay, of Istanbul in the 1920s. So that's an important insight into part of the life of the Turkish Jews of the time. It's a special part of the population, of course, but it's very, I think, very important and original. On the right, you have something that I like a lot, this kind of documents. Once again, it comes really from popular culture. It's a short story, small novel that was sold in the street on pulp paper. You know, it was really something very, very popular for the usual reading. But the interesting thing is that it is written in Judeo-Spanish, real Judeo-Spanish, not Spanish. And it was published in the 1930s in Istanbul. And where did we find this kind of publication? Well, we did get them in the archives that were given to us of a famous scholar who also was a specialist of Judeo-Spanish language and history, who was Israel Salvatore Reva. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he wrote mainly in French, but he was very important in the development of Sephardic studies. And in his very knowledgeable and scholarly books, he also had a collection of around 20 of these small novels. And why did he keep them? Maybe he liked to read that kind of books. Why not? But mainly, and you can see it in the books themselves, he worked with that to collect words, the state of the Judeo-Spanish language in Turkey in the 1930s. And so he collected words from this kind of popular books to enrich his dictionary and his studies. So I think it's very, very interesting. And you have to know also that these little books were published again a few years ago by our friend in Istanbul, Karen Sharon, who is at the Center for Jewish and Sephardic Studies in Istanbul. And she made, out of the digital copies that we produced at the Alliance, she created and she printed new versions of these novels so that you have recent publication in Judeo-Spanish still going on. So I like this kind of link of interest for the language. So let's go now to the places that were the places where the schools of the Alliance were. This is a document from 1960. Yes, 1960. Every town which is cited on the map is a place of a school of the Alliance. So you see, you have many of them in Morocco, and so Judeo-Spanish from Spanish and Judeo-Spanish from Spanish Morocco is very well represented also. You've got Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq and Iran. And you've got also Turkey and Greece, all the islands, and also Bulgaria, and also the ex-Yugoslavia, Macedonia, etc. So you've got all those places, this basin of population where most of the Judeo-Spanish locutors were living at the time, were in contact with the Alliance at the time. And you have to imagine that we have archives coming from all those little spots here, all those cities. We have archives from all those places. All right. So what can we find in those famous archives of the Alliance? Of course, it's very important for the history of the Alliance itself. Well, we have the text of the founders, we have things like that. But it's very important for the history of the local Jewish populations. And you have reports of really day-to-day events that are available in those archives everywhere. So it's very important for example, for Smyrna or Salonika, Istanbul, and all those places, but also Uskub, also Varna, also Bruce, many places where the Judeo-Spanish lived are concerned with that. You have also elements of the history of the emerging nations, mainly after the First World War, when there were the new nation states that began. You can see the effects of the new legislations, and in Turkey it's very impressive, but in Greece also, all the legislation that is trying to build a nation out of an empire, and the impact it has on the Jewish people. And more than often, it's very negative impact on the Jewish people, because I would say that the Jews in the finishing Ottoman Empire were not so bad. You know, they had their play, they had their contact, they had their relationship with the authorities, which went more or less smoothly. But when the nation state took the power, it was in many cases much more difficult. Some Jews also played the game, of course. You can see that in Hungary, you can see that in large part of Turkey also, and they agreed to become Hungarians or Turkish or Greeks and to speak the language of the new nation. But a lot of them were not really okay with that. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in most of those countries, and you know that for Greece and Salonika in particular, a lot of the Jewish population immigrated in the 1920s after the Great Fire in 1917, the war, and the arrival of the Greeks in 1912. And many of them went to France because they were educated in France, in French. And so they came to France. So you also have a lot of material, and this is particularly, I think, relevant for genealogic studies. You have information and sometimes very important and private, I would say, information from all the members and agents of the Alliance. I would say mostly the directors of the schools and the teachers of the schools. For them, we have an extended correspondence, and in those letters, they often talk about their private life. And in those letters, you can find that, well, the dates they were married, when they had children, the state of their, for example, of their parents or grandparents in their homeland, and their illness and problems, and many things of their private life emerges from these letters as well. So that's not only an administrative material. So that can be also very useful. The question I'm very often asked is, if somebody has been a pupil in a school of the Alliance, can you find information about him or her? Well, I would say it depends. It's not easy. The thing we do not have, unfortunately, is a complete set of lists of the pupils who attended the schools of the Alliance, and that's true everywhere. We do not have the books, the daily books of the schools, for example. We do not have the registers of the schools themselves. We only have the letters that were sent. So we cannot say, if you give me the name of a pupil of the Alliance, I would often have to say, well, I have no information of this or that person. But sometimes you can have other possibilities to source them. One of the sources can be the Jewish press of the time, and in particular, the press of the Alliance itself. The Alliance publishes newspapers that are partly on our digital library and partly on the Jewish Historical Press website of the National Library of Israel. And in those newspapers, you have a large list of subscribers to the Alliance and of people who received sometimes help from the Alliance, for example. So this is something you have to check. You know, sometimes and many times names can appear there. It doesn't give you a lot of information, but at least it can give you the fact for sure that these people was present in Salonika, in a particular city at a particular date, and that can be important. So that's one of the other sources related also to the library, and that goes also for people who were not members of the Alliance. So in recent times, we have worked with genealogical societies in France, with two of them, and more recently with the Cercle de Généalogie Juive, the Jewish genealogy circle. Some of you must know that. And we had an agreement with them. And so this is something in development, and I hope this will give great results in the future. What did they do? Well, I allowed them to come in the library and to have a look at the archive, now at the digital archives, and they go through the files, and every time they get a list of names, they create a database out of those names and every data and every information they collect. So little by little, we will have more names inside our common database and inside of the database related to the archives of the Alliance, and everybody will be able to look for a name and to have the information that was mentioned. I give you a couple of the examples just right now. All those examples are from Smyrna. For example, on this page, you see it's a short list of students, of Alliance students of Smyrna in 1894, I think, and they received the Medal of Honor. Okay, that's why the teacher sets up the list and sends it to Paris. And then we have, for the first class, Mr. Joseph Danon and Caleb Ashkenazi, etc., etc. So here you have some names that will be added to the database with at least the information that Danon Joseph was in the first class, and we can say first class was around 13, 14 years old, etc. In Smyrna, and he received this medal. So this is the kind of work that is being done. Another example is here. It's the local committee of the city of Melasso in Anatolia. Okay, and here you have a list, once again, a short list of people who were members of the local committee of the Alliance, and you've got their names. Levi Shem Tov, Levi Raphael, Amado Rabbeinu, Nissim Soriano, Jacob Tourel, Yechiel David Amado, Joseph Amado, etc. So once again, you have a few names that that appear and that we are now able, little by little, to gather, to keep, and to offer in the as a research tool. The last example, because every list are quite the same, but here this one is also interesting. It's a list of all the names of the pupils that went out of the school of Smyrna, of the boys' school of Smyrna, the school of the Alliance, and you've got the names and first names, you've got their ages, you've got you've got the time they were in the school, the date they were out, and you've got also, which is another part of very interesting material, the profession they are doing now, the jobs they have at the time they were out of the school. So you can see that there were accountant, there were some were in schools, still in school, or some became teachers, some became shop in shops, some book bindings, grocers, etc., etc. So you have a list of names, that's important, of ages, and you have a list of professions. And so this kind of document, if you get more and more of them, I think that can help to build a kind of sociology of the Jews in many, many cities of the Judeo-Spanish areas. So this is basically the kind of thing that you may find in our archive. So to be short, we always receive new collections. So for the Judeo-Spanish subject, we recently had the collection of Dr. Henri Naum, who unfortunately passed away 1 year ago, and who was a historian of the Jews of Smyrna. He wrote a book in French about the Jews in Smyrna. And we also received a very impressive collection of more than 3,000 photos by Mr. Enrico Issaco, who is fortunately still alive, who gave us permission to publish his photos. And many, many of his photos were offered by Judeo-Spanish families living not only in France, in many countries, who gave to Enrico Issaco their family pictures. So you can see pictures of many, many Judeo-Spanish families in this collection. So that's an enrichment, of course, and quite a recent one. So we are still digitizing the archive. So countries like, ex-Yugoslavia or Bulgaria are still to be digitized, and that will be a very important progress for the story of the Judeo-Spanish people. And you can see most of that, as I said, on the Rachel network, or on the digital library, or on Europeana. Here is the last slide where you can have information where to reach our various tools. So this is about the library of the Alliance. This is the digital library. This is the Rachel network. And this is my email where you can always try to reach me. There is also a YouTube channel about Alliance Israélite Universelle with modern and old films also. We have some old movies that are really, really interesting, and you can access all this. So now I will stop the sharing because there's no need to do this. And now I think that you have maybe many personal questions. I will not be able to answer every personal question, but feel free to send them to me at my address, biblio@aiu.org. I didn't have the time to read what's in the discussion now, but I'm sure that Tom and David will help me with that. And for the moment, I will stop with this presentation and we'll listen to what you have to say now. Thank you.
Tan, shall I go?
Shelley, please do.
Okay. Jean-Claude, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I have a question that to me, of course, is rather personal, about the extent of the records that exist for the schools that were in Iran. It's very often glossed over. People pay more attention to the other schools that are east and not that are west and not so much east in Iran. And the reason I'm particularly interested in this is that my late husband's eldest aunt was the very first girl to go to school in Tehran when the school opened in 1902. All of her siblings went there. 4 of them became teachers. Several of the other cousins, because everybody went there, became administrators or teachers in other schools in Iran, such as somebody that was the head of mathematics in the school in Kermanshah. So I'm really wondering about what list might be extant for that. And the second question, which is, I guess, kind of political, you don't have to answer it, but we know that in Iran, when Alliance opened, and again, we're not talking Sephardic in this case, we're talking Mizrahim, of course, that when the Ashkenazi teachers came in, when Alliance opened, which was the beginning of modern education in the entire country, it really impacted Judaic practices in every city where the school had opened, because they took all the Mizrahi Jewish religious practices, and you will find all the songs and all the melodies from people at that time, and you ask them to sing, well, what would be a Persian melody? And they're singing all these Ashkenazi melodies because that's what they were taught at school. It's really quite funny. But my main question, of course, is, are there lists for the students, for the teachers, administration? What historical records might be available, particularly in Tehran, when the girls' school opened, or the boys' school?
We have quite an extensive records of archives from Iran, okay, from the beginning. Even before the Alliance went there, we also have the reports of the teachers and directors that were sent to Iran as scouts, I would say, to see if things were possible. So we have all those letters. If you have all the names of the people,
very simple name. Dardashti. That's it.
Yes, but you please send it to me on an email at Biblio, and I will answer to you. And we may have for all those, as I said, who were teachers, we have quite a good chance of having material directly from their hands. You know, that's what happens.
Excellent.
And then, well, the other question is, well, that's a general question. It can be applied on to the Spanish language, but also to the Arabic language, generally on Jewish traditions. The vision of the Alliance is 19th century European and French centered, clearly. So at that time, you cannot expect that those people want to safeguard the old traditions of all those countries. They called it superstitions. You know, that's the fact. That's how they see it. And they do not, and often also, they are not in contact with, I would say, the most learned rabbis, not everywhere, it depends. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. But sometimes the very learned rabbis who are owner of very rich tradition, they are not close to the Alliance. They fear the Alliance and they fear modernization, I think, and they are not close to the Alliance. So yes, of course, following the model of the French schools, they wanted to acculturate, I don't know, that's the word, people, to transform them from Oriental into little Occidental Jews who are meant to be citizens in their own countries. That's the point. And then, of course, it had effects.
Thank you so much. I will email you. Thank you.
Yes, please.
There's a question in chat. Why did the Russians want the archives? Is it just that they stumbled upon them in Germany and decided to loot them?
Well, so that's not an entire story in itself, of course. But the Germans, they took everything they found in Germany as bounty, I would say. They had such a large extent of destruction in their own country during the war that everything they took from Germany was bounty and was bound to remain Russian property. And until today, that's a lot of them think like that. Among the things they got was millions of archives, not only from the Alliance, of course, from states and cities and associations and ministries from all the countries occupied by the Nazis and that were freed by the Russians. Okay, so they took everything. Then they kept everything, as the Nazis didn't burn the Jewish books. The Soviets didn't, of course, burn the military information from France or many things like that. They kept everything and they processed everything. That's why you saw the Cyrillic letters on our archive files, and they took everything. We believe that in some occasions what the Nazis were interested in were the enemies of the Reich. Okay, so that were the Jews, the Freemasons, the communists and socialists and workers like that, and also Polish nationalists and things like that. The Russians, when they took over this material, they were interested in the communists because they wanted to check what was going on. They were interested in Polish and, for example, Polish nationalists, etc. And they were little interested by Jews, I think. So they processed the archives and they kept them. What happened was, after the fall of the Soviet of USSR, okay, at the end of the 1980s, etc. Then there was a very lengthy negotiation between the Russian authorities and, for example, the French authorities to get the archives back. And during those negotiations, the Russians wanted to sell, to get money from that. And just an anecdote, the Russians kept for quite a long time the archives of the Alliance Israélite Universelle and were very reluctant to give them back to the French government, who gave it to us afterwards, because it was real, I would say, bad faith. They said Alliance Israélite Universelle, well, it has to do with Israel, it doesn't have to go to France, okay? So that was one of their techniques.
Okay. Are you sure you got everything back
Who
from
knows?
the Russians? Who knows? Is there a relationship between the Alliance and ORT, Organization for Rehabilitation and Training?
Yes.
And they have schools all over North Africa, Europe, and in
There is
Iran
quite,
also.
yes, there is quite a close, I would say, relationship, because the Alliance was there, okay, to open schools, to give education, instruction, but also to give social help, to give food, to give shelter, to give clothing, and to give and to help with the health of the local populations. So there was in many places, mostly in Morocco, I would say, but in many places there were close connections between ORT, Alliance, and many times also OSE, the medical association coming also from Russia, OSE as we say, and sometimes they were in the same buildings. Okay, the school building of the Alliance was also the home of the local OSE committee, for example. With ORT, it's a little less connected, because ORT has had a lot of activities in Eastern Europe, and Alliance didn't have activities there.
Okay. There's a question from Gina Marks. She noticed that as she searched on the AIU website, certain names didn't pop up, that then popped up when she did a Google book search, and she found bulletins of the Alliance. So yes. Why the discrepancy?
If you mention the bulletin of the Alliance, okay?
Yes.
Some of them were randomly digitized when there was the great Google Books thing, okay, for many years. And so when they found one on the shelf, they digitized it. Okay. At the Alliance Library, we digitize systematically all the issues of the Bulletin de l'Alliance. But at the time, we did not have our own digital library. So they were published only on the Jewish Historical Press website of Israel. That's why. But on the Alliance website, you can find now there's a kind of table where you can find for each title where to find it. I hope we will be able to have a more convenient way of accessing it, but it's for the moment
it's there
like that.
I have a question of myself about the nationality of the teachers. Were they all French, or were they also recruited locally?
Very interesting question, because the answer is neither of them, neither of your hypotheses. At the very, very beginning, when the Alliance wanted to create school, they recruited French teachers, and this lasts only for a couple of years because they were not at all adapted to the conditions of work in those Oriental countries. Imagine those Alsatian teachers with their strong Alsatian accents, which looks very German to French ears. They were sent to Fez, or they were sent to Tétouan, or they were sent to Baghdad, and they were lost. You know, it was very, very difficult for them. So the very, very good idea of the Alliance was to create a training school for the teachers that was called the École Normale Israélite Orientale, in short, ENIO, I would say ENIO, okay? And that was a brilliant idea. How did it work? Every year, the best pupils of the Alliance were selected by the directors of the schools to go through a contest that was international and that was organized by Paris. And they all answered to the same questions, had the same kind of papers to fill. And then they were the best were selected. And those lucky ones, I would say, boys and girls, very important, were sent to Paris for around 4 years. And they finished their studies in Paris. And they learned about French studies, I would say, as a general thing. And then they were sent back to the various countries. And most of the time, a girl coming from Tunisia was sent to Salonika. A boy coming from Baghdad was sent to, I don't know, to Fez or Casablanca, okay? So that was a mix of people, and they were, in their training years, they were getting a lot of this inner Alliance culture and French culture. And so when they went back, they were much more strong to confront all the schooling difficulties. But still, there were very young people. Most of them leave home at about 14, 15 years old. They stay in Paris, then they are very often they are 20 years old or less when they are sent to foreign lands for them, and they have to confront very, very hard situations.
Okay. David, there's a question on Facebook, I believe.
Yes, there is. Has the library of the École Rabbinique survived? The question is looking for a specific book mentioned in Schwarzkowski's Franco-Judaica.
Oh, well, Tchaikovsky could be a subject also. Yes, the library of the École Rabbinique had the same fate as the library of the Alliance, and they were looted at the same time by the Nazis. The books were sent more or less at the same place, and they were restituted also. Today, I'm afraid that the library of the École Rabbinique is it's still living. It has some difficulties, but it is part of the Rachel network. So basically, if you're looking for a book which is in the catalog of the École Rabbinique, you should find it on the Rachel network.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
But please, Tom and David, maybe the best thing to do, because I will not register everything that is said in the discussion, but if you can send me afterwards all the questions, and I try to answer most of them personally in the following days.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
But
There's a question about.
I just see questions. Are there American friends of the Alliance, and are there schools of the Alliance in the US? Well, no longer schools of the Alliance in the US, and I'm very, very afraid that there is a very low activity of the former Association of the American Friends of the Alliance. If anybody in the room is interested in doing work for the Alliance and funding in the US, I will be very, very interested, of course.
Are you still acquiring new archives actively?
Yes, mostly we are solicited nearly, I would say, at least every week by people wanted to give books and archives to us because somebody died in the family. Most current case is that, and they don't want those things to disappear. So they send it to us, or we try to get it. So sometimes it has little interest, sometimes it's very, very interesting. When we can, we get new collections. I mentioned this Enrico Isacco, for example. I also received recently photographs and notebook from a teacher of the Alliance who was in, I think it was in Bitola Monastir, things like that. It keeps coming. One of the main issues for us professionally is that we should now turn to transform our administrative archives of the Alliance after the Second World War into historical archives. We've begun to do that, but it goes very, very slowly because we have literally no staff now doing this. So we have a part of the archives are what we call modern archives that cover the period after 1945, but it's only for a few countries. For example, Iran is there, Morocco and Tunisia, but for many other countries, we have no possibilities to have access to the more recent archives. And the other thing I would really love to do, but in another life, is to try to go to the places where the schools used to be and to see if they are still archived there. But you imagine how difficult it is when the schools were in Iran and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, etc.
Yes.
Are you aware of novels written in Judeo-Arab in Morocco? You mentioned those in Turkey, in Judeo-Spanish. Are there similar books in Morocco?
Honestly, I don't think so.
Novels.
You can have to. We may check, but honestly, I don't think so, because I explained to you how weird, what a strange way those Judeo-Spanish popular novel followed to be in our scholarly collection today. But this didn't happen for those kind of books. And in late 19th century, beginning of 20th century, I don't think that people interested in the Alliance would read such kind of books, and more than that, preserve them. I see a question about the Jews of Algeria, Libya, many things. Yes, I can answer to most of those questions, but I don't know if we have time now. Just a word, for example, for Algeria. It's a very special case because Algeria, was a French colony, was part of the French territory, okay, for a long time. So the Alliance didn't create schools for the young Jews in Algeria because the French government did. So the Alliance didn't need to. But by the end of the 19th century, when Algeria was very agitated with anti-Semitism related to the Dreyfus affair in France, for example, the Alliance decided to set, paradoxically, religious schools, Talmud Torah, created by the Alliance to instruct the young Jews in Algeria into Jewish religion, to give them a little pride also, and also professional schools. So there were Alliance schools in Algeria, but not the same way that they were in most of the other countries.
Can I ask why you think that the Alliance didn't have competition from Britain? I mean, at the start of the process, Moses Montefiore and others were, interested in the subject. But why did the Alliance end up dominant, do you think, in education?
You have to remember that the Alliance was universelle. So it was created in France, that's right, but the members and the central committee of the Alliance for many, many years was really international.
Yeah.
There were people from every country working together at that time. For the English people, there was, I would say, help and rivalry at the same time. For example, when in 1840 there was this Damascus affair, Montefiore and Crémieux from France, Crémieux, who will later become president of the Alliance, worked hand in hand to rescue the Jews of Damascus. The Anglo-Jewish Association, the Jewish Colonization Association, and some of these institutions, English institutions, were very, and are still more or less, very close to the Alliance, okay? But of course, the Alliance never developed schools on the British territory, and was much more present in the French colonial empire than in the British one. There were a lot of German members of the Alliance Israélite Universelle at the beginning, but this, of course, ceased after the First World War, and there was a clean separation between the Germans, the Jewish Germans, and the Jewish French at the time.
Okay.
How was the Alliance funded? By its
Alliance,
members?
sorry?
How
Excuse
was
me.
it funded? Where did they get the money from?
Yeah, that's a very pressing and very contemporary question, of course. First world is not enough. Second is, at the beginning of the Alliance, there were very, very wealthy philanthropists who helped the Alliance. So first, it was a very large movement of people who subscribed. You know, there were quite a lot of individuals everywhere in the world who subscribed to the Alliance and gave money. There were very, very wealthy Jews who helped. The Rothschild helped, the Goldschmidts helped, for example, the Sassoon, the Kaduri, and the Hirsch family. Maurice and Clara de Hirsch also gave a lot of money to the Alliance. But if we don't get this kind of very, very large help, it's very difficult. Now, the Alliance gets no funding by the French government, for example. They have very, very, very few things. We've got funding from Jewish associations in France, mostly the Foundation for the Memorial, for the Memory of the Shoah, for example, something like that. But it's more and more difficult to fund the Alliance. And even when it was at its climax, just before the First World War, you can look into the archives, and there was always a money problem within the Alliance.
Yeah.
Okay.
David?
Bernard's had his hand up for a bit, so I can. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a fascinating talk. I've got a couple of questions. The teaching of languages, and also about the role of the people who were taught in the rediscovery or the readoption of Judeo-Spanish. I've been attending the Encuentros del Had, which are the weekly Ladino, and this week Haketia sessions people from Buenos Aires. And it's very interesting.
Sorry, Bernard, but
how
the
many
connection is very poor, and I really heard one word out of two. So I'm really sorry. Could you try again?
Okay, I'll try again a bit closer. Can you hear me now?
Yes, try.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
No. Okay. I put it in the Encuentros del Had, which are weekly sessions in Ladino, how many of the people who are active in trying to retain or reboost Judeo-Espanol, either Ladino or Haketia, how many of them went to schools of the Alliance? But it's
I'm sorry, Bernard, your
one question.
You can sum up the question, John, if you've heard
yes,
it better.
I'm looking it up. The question is about languages. What languages were taught, and did the Alliance play a role in the rediscovery of Judeo-Spanish or Haketia?
Yes.
Thank you.
So for languages, as I think I more or less answered, the general idea of the Alliance was not to defend the local languages and the, I would say, old languages of communities. But then I gave the example of Mr. Joseph Nehema, who was prominent in defending Judeo-Spanish language and identity. And today, what I can say is that the intellectual part of the work of the Alliance and the work of the library itself is very oriented towards the preservation of Jewish variety of cultures. For example, we are very close to French associations like Aquí Estamos or Vidas Largas, or those kind of associations who work on the preservation of Judeo-Spanish. We organize every 2 years summer university on Judeo-Spanish in Paris, when it's possible to do such things, of course. We organize that. We voluntarily develop the Judeo-Spanish aspects of our collections, really in respect to that question, because we know that Alliance had a general impact on the loss or the loss of these language. Alliance was not the only factor, of course, you know, because general globalization, modernization, and I would say Shoah was, of course, a huge element in the matter. But today, I don't know. But if I give you the example in Paris, a very few people who are interested in Judeo-Spanish language in Paris today come from Alliance schools, because Alliance schools in Turkey, for example, closed in the 1920s. So the people who could have attended those Alliance schools would be very, very old today. But most of them have their parents or grandparents who were in Alliance, and they remember that well, and they are, I would say they are as much attached to French culture and French language as to Judeo-Spanish culture. It's the way it is now.
Thank you. And before we have the final question, I think it's just sensible to recognize that the research in France is frankly way ahead of what we're doing in the Anglosphere, and we need to tap into what's going on in France, I think, much more in the future. But a last and very positive question from Joseph. How would someone in America donate to support the work of the library?
Good. What is it? There is a Jewish fund someplace in New York. Can give you the address. But yes, but you know, you can always go to the AIU website, which is in Paris, but which I think there is an English version, and you can donate there. Okay, but I will give you, and I will try to give the address. There is a
maybe you
funding
can put
network or
up your
something like that
last
in New York.
slide again.
Yes.
Maybe you can put up your last slide again with all the
Okay.
addresses.
I try to share this. So let's go.
Thank you.
Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you can.
No, thank you, because it's really
So
really
people can,
important work, and it's worth supporting.
Yeah.
Ton, would you like to
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Jean-Claude, for a lively talk and for the lots of information that you provided. And we hope to come back to you in the future. Everyone, you can reach Jean-Claude through the address mentioned in the slide. It's biblio at AIU.org and AIU.org. So that's easy. And as always, we are very grateful to our patrons who make our work possible. And we do some genealogical work on the site. You can contact David and or me for details and prices. Thank you everyone for viewing, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great.
Goodbye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
And
Goodbye.
hoping to see you in Paris when traveling is possible.
Yeah, I will. Hopefully this year.
Please God. Okay. Thank you, and see everyone next week.